The air hung heavy with the scent of dust and forgotten memories. Jake sat amidst a sea of scattered photographs, each one a painful reminder of a happier time. A younger, carefree Jake beamed back at him from the glossy surfaces. Back then, laughter came easily, and his smile was genuine. Now, the reflection staring back from the dusty mirror was a stranger. His eyes, once sparkling with life, were clouded with a deep-seated sadness. Each photograph was a shard of a life he no longer recognized. The vibrant, energetic young man in the pictures seemed a world away. The weight of his isolation pressed down on him, suffocating him in the silence of his own making. He was adrift in a sea of faces he could no longer connect with, lost in a world that seemed to have moved on without him. The outside world seemed to pulse with a vitality that Jake couldn't comprehend. Every day, he watched people move with purpose, their lives filled with a sense of direction and meaning that eluded him. The laughter, the conversations, the simple joy of being part of the crowd, it all felt like a distant dream, something he could observe but never truly experience. The city was alive, a living, breathing entity, but to Jake, it was as if he were watching it all from behind a glass wall, unable to break through and join the dance of life. He went through the motions of his day, a shadow moving through a world bathed in light. In the office, he was just another face in the crowd, blending into the background as he shuffled from one task to the next. His colleagues chatted and laughed, their voices a constant hum that he could barely register. Even in the park, where the air was fresh and the sun warm on his skin, he felt like a ghost, drifting aimlessly among the living. The city lights that once dazzled him now seemed harsh and unforgiving, casting long shadows that mirrored the darkness within him. The demands of his job felt insurmountable, each task an impossible hurdle. The stacks of paperwork on his desk seemed to grow taller by the minute, a mountain he had no hope of climbing. Deadlines loomed like dark clouds, and every email, every phone call, was a reminder of his inadequacy. His mind was a whirlwind of stress and anxiety, each thought a jagged shard that cut deeper into his sense of self-worth. The pressure was relentless, a constant weight on his shoulders that left him feeling crushed and defeated. He withdrew further, seeking solace in the silence of his apartment, his only companions the shadows that lengthened with the setting sun. The walls of his home, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison, closing in on him with each passing day. The silence was deafening, a constant reminder of his isolation. He would sit for hours, staring out the window at the world he felt so disconnected from. The fading light casting long, melancholic shadows that seemed to echo his inner turmoil. The solitude was both a comfort and a curse, a place where he could hide from the world but also where his darkest thoughts had free rein. The insistent chirping of his phone grated on his nerves. Each notification was a jarring intrusion, a reminder of the world outside that he was trying so hard to escape. The constant buzzing and ringing felt like an assault on his senses, each sound amplifying his anxiety. He dreaded picking up the phone, the thought of having to engage in conversation filling him with a sense of dread. The messages and calls from friends and family, once a source of connection, now felt like obligations he couldn't fulfill. He silenced it, the thought of social interaction sending a shiver down his spine. The act of turning off notifications was a small rebellion, a way to reclaim a sense of control over his life. But it was also an admission of defeat, a surrender to the overwhelming fear that had taken hold of him. The dark screen of his phone was a symbol of his retreat, a barrier between him and the world that he no longer felt a part of. Each time he silenced a call or ignored a message, he felt a pang of guilt, but the relief of avoiding interaction was too great to resist. Social media, once a source of amusement, now felt like a cruel parody of the life he craved. The endless stream of happy posts and smiling faces was a stark contrast to his own reality. Each photo, each status update, was a reminder of the joy and connection that seemed so out of reach for him. He would scroll through his feed, feeling a growing sense of alienation and despair. The lives of others, so full of vibrancy and excitement, only highlighted the emptiness of his own existence. The more he looked, the more he felt like an outsider, peering into a world that he could never be a part of. Images of smiling faces, exotic vacations, and celebratory milestones only served to amplify his own sense of inadequacy and isolation. Each post was a reminder of the milestones he hadn't achieved, the experiences he hadn't had. The exotic vacations were a stark contrast to his own mundane existence. The celebrations a painful reminder of the connections he lacked. The more he scrolled, the deeper he sank into a pit of self-doubt and loneliness. The vibrant images on his screen were like a mirror, reflecting back his own sense of failure and isolation. He felt like a fraud in his own life, putting on a brave face for the outside world while crumbling within. Each day was a performance, a carefully crafted facade to hide the turmoil inside. He would smile and nod, laugh at the right moments, but it was all an act. Behind the mask, he was falling apart, each forced interaction draining him further. The mirror became his enemy, reflecting back the lie he was living. The disconnect between his outer persona and inner reality was a constant source of pain, a reminder of the person he used to be and the person he had become. The effort of maintaining this facade was exhausting, but the thought of revealing his true self terrified him. Each day was a battle, a struggle to keep up appearances while his inner world crumbled. The exhaustion was bone deep, a weariness that no amount of sleep could cure. Yet the fear of being seen for who he truly was kept him going, the terror of vulnerability driving him to maintain the charade. The couch became his refuge, a place where he could collapse and let the mask slip, if only for a moment. But even in those moments of respite, the anxiety lingered, a constant reminder of the storm raging within. He was trapped in a silent storm, the waves of despair crashing over him, dragging him further down into the abyss. The storm was relentless, a constant barrage of negative thoughts and emotions that left him feeling battered and broken. Each wave of despair was a fresh assault, pulling him deeper into the darkness. The beach, once a place of solace, now felt like the edge of the world, a place where he stood alone against the raging tempest. The storm was silent, but its impact was deafening, a cacophony of pain and sorrow that drowned out all else. He longed for a lifeline, a way to break free from the relentless tide, but all he could see was the endless expanse of the stormy sea. Days blurred into weeks, each one indistinguishable from the last. Jake existed in a state of suspended animation, his life on hold. The silence that had once been a comfort had become an oppressive force, suffocating him, stealing his breath. His apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison, the walls closing in, reflecting his own sense of hopelessness. He knew he needed help, yet the words wouldn't come. The thought of reaching out, of burdening others with his pain, felt insurmountable. He was drowning in shame, convinced that his struggles were a sign of weakness, a flaw that made him unworthy of love and support. The weight of his unspoken pain pressed down on him, threatening to crush him. He was teetering on the edge of a precipice, the abyss of despair beckoning him, promising oblivion from the torment of his own thoughts. One evening, as Jake sat shrouded in the darkness of his apartment, his phone rang. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards. Jake had been in this state for weeks, barely eating, hardly sleeping, and avoiding any form of social interaction. The phone's sudden ring was jarring, pulling him out of his thoughts. He stared at the unfamiliar number, his hand hovering over the ignore button. His mind raced with thoughts of who it could be. Was it another telemarketer, or perhaps someone from work? He hadn't been in touch with anyone for so long. Hesitantly he answered, his voice barely above a whisper. It was Mark, a colleague he'd always considered an acquaintance rather than a friend. They had worked together on a few projects, exchanged pleasantries in the break room, but never really connected on a deeper level. Jake was surprised to hear from him, especially now. They exchanged pleasantries, the conversation strained, filled with awkward pauses. Jake could sense that Mark had something important to say, but he was struggling to find the right words. The silence between them felt heavy, almost suffocating.
You know, Jake, I've been through some tough times myself. Mark's voice was gentle yet firm. He spoke with a sincerity that Jake hadn't heard in a long time. It was as if Mark was reaching out to him, trying to bridge the gap that had formed between Jake and the rest of the world. I've battled my own demons, sought help, and slowly, I've been finding my way back. Mark's words resonated deeply with Jake. He had always thought he was alone in his struggles, that no one could possibly understand the pain he was going through. But here was Mark, sharing his own story of hardship and recovery.
Jake listened, his heart pounding in his chest, a strange mix of fear and hope coursing through him. He had been so consumed by his own darkness that he had forgotten what it felt like to connect with another human being. Mark's words were like a beacon, guiding him out of the fog. For the first time since his descent into darkness, Jake didn't feel entirely alone. The weight on his chest seemed to lighten, if only just a little. He realized that there was a possibility of finding his way back, of reclaiming the life he once had. Hearing Mark's story, so similar to his own, chipped away at the wall of isolation he had built around himself. It was a reminder that everyone has their own battles, and that it was okay to seek help, to lean on others for support. It was a lifeline thrown into the abyss, a glimmer of hope in the overwhelming darkness. Jake knew that the road to recovery would be long and difficult, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a spark of hope. And sometimes, a glimmer of hope is all you need to start the journey back to the light. Mark's courage to be vulnerable resonated deeply with Jake. It was a moment of raw honesty that Jake had never experienced before. He had always believed that showing vulnerability was a sign of weakness, but Mark's openness challenged that belief. It made Jake realize that there was strength in admitting one's struggles and seeking help. His words echoed in the silence of his apartment, urging him to break free from the shackles of his own shame. The quiet of the room seemed to amplify the weight of his thoughts, making it impossible to ignore the inner turmoil he had been suppressing for so long. The dim lighting cast long shadows, mirroring the darkness that had enveloped his mind. He realized that his silence was not a sign of strength, but a barrier preventing him from seeking the help he desperately needed. The reflection in the mirror showed a man who was tired of hiding, tired of pretending that everything was okay. The tear that escaped his eye was a testament to the pain he had been carrying alone. That night, Jake made a decision that would change the course of his life. He reached out. With trembling hands, he dialed the number for the mental health hotline, a lifeline he had often considered but never had the courage to call. The phone felt heavy in his hand, but the weight of his isolation was even heavier. "Jake, Mark, I need to talk." The words felt foreign on his tongue, but once spoken, they brought a sense of relief. It was the first time he had admitted to anyone, even himself, that he needed help. The concern in Mark's voice on the other end of the line was palpable, and it gave Jake the courage to continue. "I don't know where to start, but I need help." The admission was both terrifying and liberating. He had no idea what the next steps would be, but he knew that he couldn't continue on the path he had been on. The uncertainty of the future was daunting, but the determination in his voice was unmistakable.
I'm here for you, Jake. No judgment, just support. Mark's words were a balm to Jake's wounded soul. The promise of non-judgmental support was exactly what he needed to hear. It was a reminder that he was not alone, that there were people who cared about him and wanted to help him through his struggles. Let me share some resources with you. Mark's offer to provide resources was a lifeline. He handed over pamphlets, showed websites, and recommended books that could guide Jake on his journey to recovery. It was a tangible sign of support, a roadmap to help him navigate the difficult path ahead. There are therapists and support groups that can help. Mark explained the various options available, from individual therapy to support groups. He emphasized that seeking professional help was a sign of strength, not weakness. The idea of talking to a therapist or joining a support group was intimidating, but it also offered a glimmer of hope.
Taking that first step, breaking the silence that had held him captive for so long, was terrifying and liberating. It was like standing at the edge of a cliff, ready to leap into the unknown. The fear was overwhelming, but so was the sense of freedom. The sunrise over the mountains symbolized a new beginning, a chance to start over. It was an acknowledgement of his pain, a plea for help, a commitment to fighting for his own well-being. Writing in his journal, Jake poured out his thoughts and fears, acknowledging the pain he had been hiding. Reaching out for help was a commitment to himself, a promise to fight for his own well-being and to not give up. It was the beginning of his journey back to the light. The path ahead was uncertain and filled with challenges, but it was also filled with hope. The light shining through the window was a reminder that even in the darkest times, there is always a way forward. Jake's journey was just beginning, but he was no longer walking it alone.